Jessie Bush, a female Army major, had recently moved into a luxury residential neighborhood after purchasing her first villa. One bright morning, as she was cleaning the front of her new home, her peaceful routine was interrupted. Three white police officers appeared unexpectedly, their rude attitudes immediately apparent. Their suspicions were based solely on the color of her skin. What began as an unreasonable interrogation quickly escalated into a dangerous abuse of power. However, they underestimated Jessie, a woman not easily subdued, and the truth was about to cost them dearly. Thank you for being here. If you enjoy meaningful stories, please like this content and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. The Highland Estate, one of the city's most exclusive neighborhoods, exuded an air of quiet, upscale charm. The homes were modern, with white picket fences, stone driveways, and neatly trimmed lawns. That morning, under the bright sunlight, a strong black woman mopped the driveway in front of her recently purchased home. Dressed casually in a gray t-shirt, old jeans, and a scrunchie holding back her curly hair, Jessie Bush, 45, was making the house feel like home. After years of serving overseas in the U.S. Army, Jessie had returned to the city to take up a key position at the local military base. Purchasing this villa was a personal milestone, symbolizing her dedication and hard work. As she cleaned, a police cruiser slowed to a stop in front of her house. Inside were three officers: Gibson, a tall man with skeptical eyes; Nikki, who wore a smug expression; and Barbara, whose demeanor mirrored the others. Their eyes were fixed on Jessie, the black woman standing confidently in front of the beautiful home. "Look, a black woman in this neighborhood," Gibson remarked to his partners. "That's strange." Nikki smirked. "She doesn't look like she belongs here. Maybe she's hired help." Gibson pulled the cruiser over and stepped out with an air of authority. Nikki and Barbara followed closely, their eyes scanning Jessie. "Hello," Gibson said sharply, interrupting her work. "What are you doing here?" Jessie looked up, surprised by the abruptness. Setting her broom aside, she maintained her composure. "I'm cleaning in front of my house," she replied. Gibson raised an eyebrow, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Your house? You mean this mansion?" "Yes," Jessie responded politely. Nikki chuckled. "A house like this? Are you sure?" Jessie began to feel the weight of their disrespect, but stood her ground. Straightening her posture, she replied, "I don't need to explain myself. This is my home, and I don't think you have any reason to doubt that." Gibson crossed his arms, his tone growing more condescending. "Can you prove it? Where's the deed? Did you sneak in here?" Taking a deep breath to calm herself, Jessie replied firmly, "I have no obligation to prove anything to you. This is my property, and I've done nothing wrong." Barbara interjected with a disdainful smile. "Then you won't mind if we come in and check, will you?" "You don't have a search warrant, and I don't agree with this abuse of power," Jessie stated, her voice resolute. Gibson stepped closer, his tone turning menacing. "You'd better cooperate if you don't want to get in trouble. We're just making sure nothing unusual is going on here." Jessie met his gaze, without flinching. "I've made it clear. If you don't have a warrant, you can't come in. I know my rights, and I won't back down." Her unwavering stance enraged Gibson. He sneered and turned to his teammates. "Who does she think she is? Acting like we have no right to be here." Nikki and Barbara laughed, though uneasily, as their suspicions grew. They weren't accustomed to this kind of resistance, especially from a black woman. "You're asking for trouble," Gibson said, his tone threatening. He motioned to Nikki and Barbara. "Go check her out. I'll deal with her." As his partners entered the house despite Jessie's protests, Gibson confronted her, his face a mask of anger. "I'm warning you one last time. Don't make this difficult." Jessie crossed her arms, her voice calm but firm. "And I'm warning you. Your actions will have serious consequences. Stop before it's too late." Her composed defiance unsettled Gibson. He clenched his fists, then suddenly pulled out his gun, aiming it at Jessie. "You're not in charge here. Sit down and be quiet," he shouted. Jessie stood still, her calm gaze fixed on him. Years of military service had prepared her for high-pressure situations far worse than this. Anger simmered within her, But she refused to act rashly, knowing the home's cameras were recording everything. Inside the house, Nikki and Barbara searched every room, looking for anything to justify their suspicions. Instead, they came across a wall of honor, a display of military medals and a photograph of Jesse in uniform, standing beside the mayor and the city police chief. Nikki's face paled. "We've made a huge mistake," he muttered, panic creeping into his voice. Barbara nodded, his expression equally shaken.
"She's not just anybody.
She's Major Jesse Bush, U.S. Army, and she knows the mayor and the police chief." Realizing the gravity of their mistake, the two officers rushed outside to stop Gibson before things spiraled further. Jessie remained calm, her unwavering gaze meeting the barrel of Gibson's gun. "Who do you think you are to defy us?" he roared. "What gives you the right to act like this?" Jessie shot back, her voice sharp yet controlled. "I warned you. You will be held accountable for your actions." Before Gibson could respond, Nikki and Barbara burst out of the house, panic etched across their faces. "Gibson, put the gun down," Nikki shouted. Gibson turned to them, confused.
"What? Why?"
"She's no ordinary person," Nikki said, his voice low and urgent. "She's Major Jesse Bush, U.S. Army. And she's connected to both the mayor and the police chief." Hearing this, Gibson froze, his eyes darting to Jesse, now filled with confusion and regret. Major Jesse Bush stood silently, her unwavering gaze fixed on Gibson. Her composure exuded confidence, yet her eyes held the intensity of a seasoned soldier. Nikki leaned closer to Gibson and whispered urgently, "We just messed up. If the higher-ups find out, we're done for." Gibson's face paled as his hands trembled. Slowly, he lowered his gun, his anger giving way to panic. I didn't mean to," he stammered, his voice trailing off. Barbara stepped forward, her expression filled with remorse. "Ma'am, we're truly sorry. We acted out of line. It was wrong to doubt you, and we shouldn't have behaved this way." Jessie folded her arms, her authoritative demeanor unshaken. She remained silent for a moment, letting the weight of their actions sink in. Finally, she spoke, her voice calm but cutting. "Not only were your actions rude and racist, but they also constituted a blatant abuse of power. This will not be ignored." Nikki and Barbara bowed their heads, unable to meet her gaze. Gibson, clutching the gun tightly, stood frozen in place, his shame evident. Jessie continued, her tone sharp. "I've documented everything. My security cameras recorded every word and action. This evidence will go to the sheriff, and I assure you, there will be consequences." Hearing this, the officers turned pale, their faces reflecting the gravity of their mistake. Nikki, grasping for a resolution, tried to plead. "Miss, please. It was a misunderstanding. We didn't mean any harm. Give us a chance to make it right." Jessie raised an eyebrow, her disbelief evident. "A misunderstanding? You pointed a gun at me and your colleagues broke into my house without a warrant. Now you call it a misunderstanding." Nikki faltered, unable to respond. Jessie stepped closer to Gibson, her piercing gaze locked on him. "And you, what do you have to say for yourself? You drew a gun on an innocent woman standing in front of her own home."
"Why?"
"Because her skin color was different from yours." Gibson opened his mouth, but no words came. Jessie's voice grew firmer. "You have two options. Either take responsibility for your actions, or I'll let the law handle this." Without waiting for a response, Jessie turned and walked back into her house, leaving the officers standing in silence, consumed by their guilt. As she closed the door, Jessie leaned against it and took a deep breath, her emotions catching up with her. Despite her outward composure, the anger she felt was undeniable. She was determined to hold them accountable, not just for herself, but for everyone who had faced similar injustices. Jessie activated her security system and reviewed the footage from her front yard camera. The video captured everything: the officer's rude remarks, their unauthorized entry into her home, and Gibson pointing his gun at her. She picked up her phone and called the sheriff's office. "This is Major Jesse Bush. I need an urgent appointment with the sheriff regarding a serious case of abuse of power by his officers. Her firm tone prompted an immediate response, and the appointment was scheduled. Sitting at her desk, Jessie replayed the footage. This wasn't just about her. It was about making a stand against systemic abuse. The following day, Jessie arrived at the city's police department, dressed in full military uniform. Her polished boots echoed through the corridors as she walked, her medals gleaming, a testament to her long and distinguished career. Heads turned as officers noticed her presence, some recognizing her immediately. Jessie ignored the stares and went straight to the front desk. "I have an appointment with Chief Gordon," she stated. The receptionist nodded and directed her to the second floor. Moments later, she stood in Chief Gordon's office. The sheriff, a tall man with gray hair, greeted her warmly. "Major Jesse Bush, it's an honor. Please have a seat." Jessie shook his hand but remained standing. She placed a USB drive on the desk and said firmly, "I'm not here for pleasantries, Sheriff Gordon. I'm here to present evidence of a serious incident that occurred yesterday at my home." Gordon frowned, his expression serious. "What kind of incident?" Jessie gestured to the USB. "This contains footage from my security camera. 3 of your officers abused their authority, insulted me, and threatened me. One even pointed a gun at me. The other 2 entered my house without a warrant." The sheriff's face hardened as he plugged the USB into his computer. Silence filled the room as he watched the footage. Every detail was laid bare. The officers' derogatory remarks, their blatant overreach, and Gibson's reckless use of his weapon. When the video ended, Gordon leaned back, visibly disturbed. "I can't believe this happened under my watch. This is completely unacceptable," he said. Jessie crossed her arms. "I'm not here just to report this. I'm here to demand action. If you fail to hold these officers accountable, I'll escalate this to higher authorities and involve the media." Gordon sat up straighter, his tone resolute. "That won't be necessary, Major Bush. I assure you, this will be dealt with immediately. The officers involved will be suspended, and a formal investigation will be launched. If they're found guilty, there will be zero tolerance." Jessie studied him for a moment before nodding. "I hope you stand by your word." As soon as Jessie left, Gordon convened an emergency meeting with his department's leadership. In the conference room, he played the video for his senior staff. The room was heavy with silence as the gravity of the situation sank in. "We're facing a major issue," Gordon said, his voice firm. "The actions of these officers not only tarnish our department's reputation but also erode public trust. This cannot stand." The department heads agreed unanimously. The 3 officers, Nikki, Barbara, and Gibson, were promptly suspended. When they were summoned to Human Resources, their reactions varied. Nikki and Barbara accepted their suspension quietly, guilt written all over their faces. Gibson, however, exploded with anger. "What the hell? We were just doing our job. Why are you suspending us?" he shouted. The HR manager replied coldly, "This is not about doing your job. This is about abuse of power and misconduct. You'll have your chance to defend yourself during the investigation." For Jessie, the fight wasn't over. But as she left the station that day, she knew she had taken the first step toward justice, not just for herself, but for everyone who deserved better from those sworn to protect them. Gibson's face was red with anger. "What the hell? We were just doing our job. Why are you suspending us?" he shouted as he leaned over the desk in the Human Resources office. The HR manager didn't flinch. Her cold, firm gaze met his. "You have the right to appeal, Officer Gibson, but I strongly advise you to prepare for the worst. The evidence speaks for itself, and the video proves everything." Gibson cursed under his breath, storming out of the room. Yet, deep down, he could feel the weight of his actions beginning to crush him. For the first time, he began to sense the looming consequences of his choices. 2 days later, Jessie received a call from Sheriff Gordon. His tone was calm but firm. "Major Bush, I wanted to inform you that the 3 officers involved in the incident have been suspended. We've initiated an investigation, and a final decision will follow soon." Jessie took a moment to let his words sink in before replying. "Thank you, Sheriff. I hope you'll keep your promise." This isn't just about me. It's about protecting others from the same abuse of power and injustice. Sheriff Gordon's voice carried a note of determination. You have my word, Major. Behavior like this will not be tolerated in my department. The case gained widespread attention within the police department and the local community. When Jesse's security footage was officially released by the police as part of their commitment to transparency, the public was outraged. The video quickly went viral, igniting heated discussions on social media and sparking calls for justice across various platforms. 2 weeks later, Chief Gordon held a public press conference to announce the results of the investigation. Jesse was invited to attend as a key witness. The room was packed with reporters and concerned citizens. Cameras flashed as Gordon approached the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, after a thorough and transparent investigation, we have reached a conclusion, he began, his voice steady yet firm. He paused to take a deep breath. Officer Gibson, who drew his weapon on Major Jesse Bush, has been charged with assault, endangering the life of a citizen, and a severe breach of departmental regulations. He was arrested this morning and is now facing criminal charges. If convicted, he could serve up to 4 years in prison. A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd, but Gordon held his composure. Nikki and Barbara, the 2 officers who unlawfully entered Major Bush's home without a warrant, have also been found guilty of severe misconduct. Both officers have been terminated and will face administrative action. Reporters raised their hands, eager to ask questions, but Gordon gestured for silence. Let me finish, he said firmly. We extend our deepest apologies to Major Jesse Bush for the trauma she has endured. This police department is committed to strengthening its internal controls and ensuring that racist and abusive behavior will have no place here. After his address, Gordon invited Jesse to speak. She stepped up to the podium, her military uniform adorned with medals that glimmered under the bright lights. Her sharp eyes scanned the room, her presence commanding silence. I want to thank the police department for acting swiftly and transparently in this matter, she began. But let me be clear, this is not just my story. It is the story of millions who have suffered and continue to suffer injustice simply because of the color of their skin or their appearance. She paused, her voice steady, yet filled with emotion. I've dedicated my life to serving and protecting this country. I've fought to uphold the rights and freedoms of every citizen. But that day, in front of my own home, I wasn't treated as an equal citizen. That is unacceptable. Applause erupted in the room, but Jesse raised a hand, quieting the crowd. This issue isn't resolved by firing or prosecuting a few individuals. It demands a complete cultural shift, a reevaluation of how we train and supervise law enforcement. I urge our leaders to commit to this change so that no one else has to endure what I did. Her words struck a chord, resonating far beyond the walls of that press conference. The trial and aftermath. 2 months later, Gibson stood trial. Jesse appeared as a key witness, and her security footage served as damning evidence. Despite his lawyer's attempts to frame his actions as a reaction to a high-stress situation, the facts spoke louder than any argument. This officer used unnecessary force and endangered the life of an innocent citizen without any justifiable cause. This is a clear abuse of power, and it cannot be tolerated, the prosecutor declared. In the end, Gibson was sentenced to 4 years in prison for intimidation with a weapon and abuse of power. The police department didn't stop at punishing the 3 officers involved. Under public pressure and scrutiny from independent organizations, Chief Gordon implemented a series of reforms. 1. Mandatory anti-racism training. All officers were required to attend training focused on cultural awareness and community engagement. 2. Enhanced oversight. Procedures for monitoring police behavior during public interactions were tightened. 3. Community representation. An independent oversight board, composed of community leaders, was established to ensure transparency and fairness in police operations. Jesse's story became a national conversation, sparking debates on systemic issues within law enforcement. She was invited to share her experience on several television shows. During one interview, the host asked, Major Bush, looking back on everything that's happened, do you feel that justice was served? Jessie smiled faintly, her expression thoughtful. Justice isn't just about punishing those who've done wrong. It's about using these moments to create real, lasting change. I believe we've taken a step in the right direction, but the fight isn't over. I'll continue to push for change, not just for myself, but for everyone who has suffered in silence. Her words resonated deeply, inspiring countless individuals to join the fight for equality and accountability. If you've been moved by Jessie's story, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more powerful, transformative stories. Together, we can shine a light on injustice and work toward a better future.